Good morning. So in this last lecture of 2022, which I can't believe, but anyway it is, we're moving from what is nowadays Belgium, which was the Spanish Netherlands, to the Dutch part of it, so the Republic of the Netherlands, one of the first republics with Venice and Florence in Europe. So talking about Dutch art, we'll have to discuss a little bit about history, because this is a very crucial moment in the Northern Europe history. Let me actually move, that's it. That one won't. Yeah, okay. So as we've seen with nowadays Belgium, there was that love for these special maps, special cartography, where they equal a country to an animal, and particularly the lion. So we had seen the map of Leo Belgicus, the Latin name, and now that same Leo Belgicus has been adapted to the Netherlands, and so we see here the southern part, and this is supposed to be Belgium. And so they put all the provinces of the north into the body of that lion. And all around you have pictures of the main cities in the Netherlands. Always a really funny looking, but it was reproduced. I have a few very old books that show the Leo Belgicus in the front page of the old books. So let's talk about politics, and for whatever reason it shows this in first. So let's talk about in 1560, what happens is, following the abdication of Charles V, who had been emperor since 1519, his son Philip II inherits the Low Countries, and not as attuned to the Low Countries as his father was, because Charles was born in Belgium, in Ghent. Philip was born in Spain, didn't know the Netherlands, didn't speak Flemish, and decided this was such a rich place. It was going to be the place to extract more money. So suddenly what he does, because they've already kind of spend most of the new gold that they brought from the New World, he decided to impose new taxes on the Low Countries and take away many of their privileges. And privileges were very important. It gave the right to different cities and so on to do things without having to ask for permission all the time. Of course, the Low Countries didn't like that at all, and they started revolting. Now, the revolt was also mixed with the fact that Philip II, Antwerp, which was the very center, the biggest city of the Low Countries, was the most liberal city in Europe. It allowed all kinds of religion, which was interesting, Catholicism being always the major one, but you had the new Reformed churches, but you also had Lutheranism, and you had Anabaptism and all these, and a pretty good amount of Jewish people that had come to the north from Spain and Portugal once they were expelled from these places. So the reaction was, okay, we have to tell Spain we don't want of that new regime. And they tried to unite the provinces against Spain. What happens is the southern provinces that made the Low Countries resisted a little bit that decision, because you had a whole body of aristocracy that were very dependent on the crown. If they were seceding from it, forget about the aristocracy, they would have no more right than any other people. So finally, it's only the northern provinces that will secede. But at first, it was all these provinces decide to go behind the leadership of William of Nassau, Prince of Orange. And that was in the 1560s. By 64, he's named stadhouder, which would be stadholder in English, of the northern provinces of Holland, Zeeland, and Utrecht, which are nowadays in the Netherlands. Stadhouder meant that he was the governor and mostly in charge for foreign affairs. He wouldn't deal so much with the inner politics of each provinces, but once he was the stadholder of these provinces, he would take care of these relationships with other countries. In 1573, he converts to Calvinism, which of course is going to make a big step of what's going to happen. And in 1581 comes the Act of Abjuration with the alliance of 5 of the 7 northern provinces that are protected by the great rivers. And indeed, you have the Maas and the Rhine that are throwing themselves in the sea, in the northern sea, that go from the south there, and are very large river in the Netherlands. Was very important, as you can imagine, as means of transportation. Transportation by river is always much easier. You can take a program on the little table there at the corner. Yes. No, it's okay. Unfortunately for him, there's lots happening, lots of conflicts. In 1584, William of Nassau is assassinated in Delft. And we'll see, once we talk about Delft, we'll see the place where it happened, by a Catholic man that was resenting the fact that that separation. He is going to be succeeded by his son Moritz. And don't believe that the Moritz comes from that one. No, Moritz of the Moritz was a cousin, but they all had more or less the same name. There were lots of William and a lot of Morris. So Morris is going to succeed him, and we'll see until when. It will be until 1648, until all that is formalized in the Peace of Munster between the Dutch Republic and England, and also with Spain recognizes the same year, recognizes the status of the new Republic of the Netherlands. So as you can see, for about 60, close to 80 years, because it's part of the 80-year war, you have that constant conflict until it's decided that this is official. And in 48, but previous to that, they were already acting as if ever it was. In 1653, William III of Orange becomes stadhouder. In 58, he marries Mary Stuart. And in 89, they become King and Queen of England as William and Mary. So this is how you get the deal. We'll go back through many of these things. So this is the northern provinces, what makes the Netherlands in 1609, which is just the beginning of the truce, the 12-year truce. And you can see what we typically, where we talk about Holland, this is, you have North Holland and South Holland. Often when we talk about the Netherlands, we say Holland or Holland. But Holland is only a province, if you want, or 2 provinces of the Netherlands. So a very important one, as you can see, because Amsterdam is in there. We talk about Utrecht, and we'll talk particularly today about it. Then you have North Brabant, the Gelderland, Overijssel, Drenthe, Flevoland, Friesland, and Groningen and Drenthe. And the more north you go, the more Scandinavian it starts looking, by the way. And even the language becomes quite different in the north compared to the south. It's a much more guttural, even more guttural language in the north. Now, something particular to the Netherlands is the fact that it was at the beginning incredibly, it was really covered by water. And what you see in blue that is now a land used to be water. And one of the extraordinary things that the Dutch did is recover the land from the water. They're going to pump out the water into the sea and build a lot of dams and higher terrain to prevent the water to come back. So look at these two maps. It's incredible to think that all that was underwater. There was a large influx of Flemish and French immigrants that were fleeing the Spanish occupation in their city. As Philip II decided that he wanted Antwerp and all the rest of the Netherlands to be reconverted to Catholicism, because he was a very, very Catholic king, he's going to give them 3 years to convert. And if they didn't, they had to leave the country. So Antwerp lost more than half of its population at that time, of people that had to leave. And these were typically that very rich middle class, more learned people and skilled workers. And so all that, yes.
Where's Antwerp?
Antwerp is down here. Let me see here. So Antwerp is in Belgium. So the amazing emigration happens mostly to the Netherlands, to Germany, and to England. But this is why when Antwerp was had the higher number of artists per capita, is going to lose a lot of its artists that are going to go north. And so a lot of what we'll see are people that are either themselves were born in Belgium or their parents were, and they just go on with their skill. So let's look at the idea of how they were able to pump the water out of these lower lands. So the windmill is going to be very instrumental in this. So they would have kind of chain of windmill that would pump the water from one level to the other until it was in the sea. And this has been now replaced by pumping station, which they have to keep on doing because the water has that natural gravity to go down. So they're still pumping, and you can see the Archimedes screw there that is bringing the water at the higher level. So this is what we call polders. Polders are these terrain that are recovered from the sea. It's one of the actually only places in Europe that has that. And so they have that very long history of reclamation of marshes and what they call fenland to do that. So the saying in Holland is, God created the world, but the Dutch created the Netherlands, because it's really with their hard work that they came to do it. And so you have, this is really important because it explains a lot of the pride they had in that country that they literally built by their own hands. The economy, the population in 1553 is about 1 million, 55, sorry, is about 1.5 million. They had to import food and raw material because it was, the Netherlands, as you can imagine by the map we just saw, is very flat. You have no mountain, and therefore you don't have a lot of rocks or things like this. Once the water is gone out, you have to desalinize because that's seawater. And once you do that, you can come to something quite fertile. So they started building canals. And after Antwerp Harbor is blockaded in 1585, Amsterdam is going to become the most important harbor in Northern Europe. By 1602, the Dutch found the East India Company, which is going to go east and in search of spices and everything very precious to them. By 21, they also found the Dutch West Indian Company that goes to the Americas and Africa. And this comes into direct competition with what the Portuguese were doing. So it's really interesting to see what happens, because Antwerp benefited a lot from Portuguese commerce. But once the Dutch go and found their own company, this goes straight against Portugal. In 28 years, Amsterdam triples its population. It's almost like Phoenix. Influx of refugees, Protestant from southern Netherlands, Jews from Portugal and Spain. And as far as the sociological structure, there is no more aristocracy, but rich families, which are going to replace and live like aristocrats, if you want, in similar ways. And we see the typical thing that happens, gap between the rich and the poor grows wider. But they take really good care. Let me see, is that... Why is that? The charitable institutions are really big in the Netherlands, and we have all these people taking care of older population that is struggling for survival. The poor, the sick, the orphans, and the old people are really taken care of by society itself. As far as religion, great importance of religious life, which means it's nothing to do with Catholicism, but they want the values of their religion to be part of everyday life. The main religion are the Calvinists, and then with some restrictions, which means they typically don't have access to the same high position in administration and so on. You have other Protestant obedience like the Lutherans, the Mennonites, also the Jews that were expelled from Spain and Portugal in 1492, and there are Catholics that are tolerated as long as they don't proselytize. As long as they don't try to convert other people, they are absolutely, they're tolerated. And this is very obvious, because what happens is the Calvinists are going to take over the Catholic churches, but going to change them, because as they don't, as they discourage, let's say, icons, that it is sculpture particularly, but also no painting, no stained glass, they're going to replace the beautiful stained glass, except in some cities where they're so sacred to the city that the city is going to prevent them to move them. And we'll see some of these places. But as you can see, the walls are whitewashed, no frescoes, no more painting. The only thing that you might see are these that are in fact just coat of arms of people that are buried at the foot of the column. Definitely no sculpture. So the church has become very, very simple. Now, there's also a very interesting phenomenon, which are clandestine churches. And I'm using here my little guidebook, which is fabulous because that's the only one that really shows an interesting point. So that Catholic church is one of 12 that existed in Amsterdam, that was built on top of the top 3 floors of a canal house during the 1660s. And you see here a really nice elevation to see how they dug up. All this is the church that is really dug out of within a regular house. And so I'm always laughing because you can imagine that on the Sunday, suddenly that house would get enormous amount of visitors that would come in and then worship, try to be discreet. And this is a museum, by the way, since the 1880s. You can visit it. The only thing, you go through the red district the red light district, when you go to visit it. It's close to the Royal Palace. And I'm going to show you some detail, but it's very, very interesting. The church is a church. Let's see, the museum is called the Amstel King because it's on the Amstel River. But here's the inside of that clandestine church. So pretty good size, as you can see, with galleries. They have 3 altarpieces that they can change depending on the liturgy of the time. There is on the side, you go behind the altar and you take the pulpit and it unrolls and it becomes a regular pulpit so that the priest can do his sermon. A lot of paintings on the wall in regular pews. They even have, as you can see, an organ, and that might be questioned. Listen, organ makes a lot of noise. It must have been heard from the outside, but anyway, it was tolerated. So a very interesting thing. This is, I think, the only one that still exists, but there were at least 12 just in Amsterdam. The Netherlands, because of its liberalism, also attracted some illustrious immigrants. And the first one we can see is René Descartes, very influential French philosopher, mathematician, scientist, and writer, who had been dubbed the father of modern philosophy, and as is known in mathematics for its Cartesian coordinate system, that system that allows you to put in algebraic terms the geometric shapes. And so when you hear Cartesian, you might not think right away to Descartes, but that's Descartes that invented this. He is also very famous for having said, cogito ergo sum, which means, as I think, I am. I think, therefore, I am. Which was an amazing concept, by the way. Another very important figure is Baruch Spinoza. He was a Dutch philosopher of Portuguese Jewish origin. He was one of the great rationalists of the 17th century, laying ground for the 18th century Enlightenment and also of modern biblical criticism. What is interesting, he was a very modest person and lived as a lens grinder, turning down rewards and honors throughout his life that included prestigious teaching position that he refused. But really interesting, and he's still read nowadays. His books are quite interesting. And then, of course, John Locke. John Locke that had to flee England because of his revolutionary ideas about natural rights and government. He fled to the Netherlands in 1683 under strong suspicion of involvement in the Rye House plot. While in the Netherlands, he had time to write. And so he went back to his writing, spending a great deal of time reworking the essay and composing the letter on toleration. He did not return home until after the Glorious Revolution. So these are, you can imagine that just these 3 figures would attract a lot of people that would come to sit with them and discuss with them. Now, as far as Dutch art, what is the difference between the art in the north and in the south? Art of the 15th century in the north was by far not as extraordinary than the one in the south for the reason that they were away from the court. When you're away from the court, you're away from money, because all you're going to work are for a few nobles that lived at that time in northern Netherlands. But you can really differentiate these very good artists because of the much more simple approach of, you know, the kind of decor they're using, and even in their religious paintings. By the 17th century, they will be very influenced by Caravaggio and by Rubens. And Rubens, as we know, is going to have an incredible fame throughout Europe. And despite the fact he was Catholic, he's going to have great impact on the northern paintings. It is, the Dutch art is quite realist and brings some creativity, because suddenly there is a shift in the subject matters that we will see because of the kind of customer base that they have. An important figure is Karel van Mander, not so much as a painter, we'll see one work by him in a minute, but by what he wrote. He wrote Het Schilderboek in 1604, which was in a sense a response to Vasari's book on the illustrious sculptors and painters and architects in Italy, that was kind of treating Northern artists as lesser artists. So for him, this was the response to show that there was real art happening in the North. Devotional images, as you know, were prohibited in Calvinist churches, except in Catholic Utrecht. Utrecht, that province in the middle there, the Netherlands, remains Catholic and is actually even a bishopric. So because you can't have devotional images in the church, which was a very, very large customer for painters, about 50% in the South was going just through churches and with religion leading institution. So we do have an influence by religion, but it's more in the kind of a moral way, and we will encounter them regularly. Very, as we said, that moral way is also connected to the emblem books, that were books written with little images and moral sentences, moralizing sentences, and the painters are going to be influenced by these emblems and then expand on it in paintings. The guild system that existed early is going to pretty quickly move into the Academy of Art. In 1655, it is founded in The Hague. Predominance of painting over sculpture and architecture, and there is definitely a lack of great patrons. The stadtholder is so busy with the wars and other things that they don't commission too many works. Mostly, at first, the great patrons will be rich merchants that are trying to live like the aristocracy of before. But what is really interesting is the new science. And that is really a booster from the fact they've left Catholicism. Catholicism was very protective on science. They were very critical very often. And so suddenly being more liberated, they all kind of new things, mostly coming from the creation of new lenses. And so we have the invention of the microscope, the telescope, and great advances in cartography. The art market is aimed at middle class. There are new themes and smaller size painting because they have to accommodate the smaller houses. And then we have also the emergence of art dealers. So you don't have, as in Antwerp, that pand, that was that big building where painters could come and exhibit their paintings. But now you have art dealers, and we know, for example, the mother-in-law of Vermeer was an art dealer. But prior to that, there were many others. So just to remind you, these are works by Caravaggio and Rubens. They both are extremely influenced in that Tenebrism on the left by Caravaggio, that big contrast of light and dark. And also that kind of much more human representation by Rubens. This is the picture of his, that celebrates his marriage to his first wife, Isabella Brandt, where he shows himself not, standing next to her and not looking at her, but he holds her hand. There's a show of affection, but still symbolism behind that is really part of the Flemish tradition. We'll see the difference between them, though, is that is really rooted in the religion. If you compare these two works that show the same scene, which is the descent from the cross, the one on the left by Rubens still shows Christ, even though he's dead, as a very athletic person, and shows more kind of a triumph of Jesus over death for salvation. That's the Catholic idea. Whereas on the right, you see that painting by Rembrandt that shows a pitiful Jesus that is, you can feel the heaviness of his body that is inanimated, and emphasizes the suffering of the passion, which would be typical of Calvinism. I talked to you about emblems. Here is a typical page of an emblem book where you would have an illustration and then you would have a legend down below. This would be fit, because often it was in Latin, fit spolians polium, the hunter may become the prey, as you can see there. That was published in 1618. And it typically combines a caption and a picture, and where the connection is not always obvious, but made clear by the verses. Very, very important aspect of the emblem books at the time. The status of the painter at first is really kind of, he's still a craftsman. He's a middle-class person, and in that lovely picture by Adriaan van Ostade, you see the artist studio. It's kind of in a small house. The only light that comes in is natural light through the window, and they might have some candle lights to work on. But this shows much more middle-class type of person that's going to evolve. And by the second part of the 17th century, the painter is associated with liberal arts, and he become an intellectual. And here is the famous Art of Painting by Johannes Vermeer. As far as portraiture, they still depend on the tradition that existed in the whole of Netherlands. And the first one being, of course, Jan van Eyck with his self-portrait up there that shows that revolution in portraiture of the time, because all portraits were done in profile, much easier to just trace a profile. You don't have to deal with expression or whatever when it's like this. And it brings you back to the Roman coins where the profile of the emperor were stamped on. He changes all that by coming three-quarter the face. We see both eyes, and therefore we see the personality. And this is the big revolution of Jan van Eyck in that extraordinary portrait, the self-portrait of him. It goes on. That's really the tradition in Flemish painting. That's why Flemish portraitists are going to be called into Italy. And very often in the northern part of Italy, all the portraits are made by Flemish painters, not by Italian ones. Peter Christus is another one. I love that painting. It's so pretty. Roger Campin, who is the teacher of Rogier van der Weyden. And all this you can see follow the lead of Jan van Eyck. And this is from there that are going to come these amazing portraits by Frans Hals, and then so many portraitists in the Netherlands. Art is also a reportage. It shows things that happen. And here we have a whale that is beached on the Dutch coast. Huge animal, as you can see, and it's always quite an incredible moment for people because they're going to take advantage of it too. They're going to get all the fat and the teeth and everything that the whale is going to produce. But this is become, you know, that reportage that happened that date in the Netherlands. This, by the way, was also more or less shown by Peter Bruegel earlier. And then we have new genre painting. And sorry, I did wrong. Let me go like this. We have genre scenes, which show domestic life, the one on the upper left. This is a new type of painting that is starting to show in Antwerp, but becomes very common there, often moralizing. It has these underlying meaning that show, you know, laziness. This is the case here, is that if the servant is asleep at the task, then the cat takes advantage and goes away with the fish. you know, so that's a moralizing painting on laziness. But as you can see in the middle, landscapes become a genre by itself, not anymore as a backdrop for a story, but just in this case, as you can imagine, it's really showing the pride of the Dutch people for their country. And the extraordinary Van Heusdaal is giving that large sky. As you know, the country is so flat, so you have these very low horizon, these beautiful skies always have, you never see a blue sky over there. You see clouds and the blue sky, but clouds are permanently there. And also the great role of the middle, which is really like a heroic statue there. And then we have the still lifes, where painters show their skills at showing different textures, which is extremely difficult. The people that were doing some still lifes were saying they'd spend much more time doing that than having to do figures, because it's so different. Silver reflects light a different way than pewter or gold or glass. And so this was really the kind of technical skill exhibition, if you want. So these three genres are going to be very well adapted to bourgeois homes, where they become a lovely description, you know, lovely decoration, and often conversation pieces. They didn't have any television, so when they would go there, they could talk about things and describe how amazing that landscape is, or beautiful pieces, and the skill of that painter, or the stupid laziness of the servant on the left. As usual, you know me, you get your timeline, but I always love it. And you have on the top, I put two Italian artists, because they both, by the way, became Mannerists. Michelangelo, at the end of his career, has a Mannerist style that really derives from the sack of Rome, that really shocked him. And so he follows that new fashion in Florence of looking at things and not representing what is natural, but rather follow what he has in his imagination and what he wants to do. And so we'll see some Mannerist paintings too. But as we know, influenced by Caravaggio too, who is from the northern Italy, and by Rubens, that is here. As you can see, we'll see these three Mannerist painters, Goltzius, Wittewal, and Karel van Mander, the writer too, more known for his writing than by his painting. I put only one painter from Utrecht, Hendrik ter Bruggen. And then we have Frans Hals that we'll discuss a little more at length with his marvelous portraits. I put Rembrandt there as a reference, so you have an idea where they come from. At the bottom, you also see the transition from Spanish ruling here of Charles V and Philip II, where William Nassau is going to take over. He's killed in 84. His son, Maurice Nassau, inherits the stadtholder status. Frederick Hendrik also, though this is always an election, it's not a natural succession. So they every time have to be elected to become the stadtholder. And then we have William II, who is going to live very short life. And finally, William III, who is going to become William and Mary, King of England. Late Mannerism. At the time, it was considered as a natural progression from the High Renaissance. It comes from maniera in Italian, manner. Happened alongside a number of other social, scientific, religious, political movements, such as the Copernican model, the sack of Rome, and the Protestant Reformation. These were earth-shaking events, and it really changed the approach of many artists. It is anti-classical. They're not looking at the perfection of anatomy and so on. They typically show elongated forms, really special, very precariously balanced poses, collapsed perspective, often very shallow. irrational settings, theatrical lighting. They are typically intellectual conceits and artistic virtuosity, and they show that nature should be studied but not copied. And here are two works, one from the Italian school by Bronzino, the Venus and Cupid, very, very typical Mannerist side of the tail end of the Renaissance, where you can see just bizarre pauses that show actually no logical balance. If you look at it, you always have the feeling she's going to fall because she doesn't hold properly on her knees. He has a very strange position too. Then you have these gods of time and other really bad gods behind there. Just a really interesting view, but totally different than the classical Renaissance. This is brought to France by many Italian artists, and they found what is called the School of Fontainebleau. And here you have the example of Birth of Cupid, where you can see how they have tiny feet and tiny hands for the massive body. You see, it makes no sense. And this is reproduced by many artists that have gone to Italy or have seen prints of the works. And here you have Cornelis van Haarlem that shows that kind of similar work with often a lot of nudity, but just not the classical beauty of the Renaissance. One of the great masters of that Mannerist period is Hendrik Goltzius, who was a graphic artist and a painter of German descent, but he's really probably the most outstanding engraver of his time in the North. He became the leader of a group of Mannerist artists, including Cornelis van Haarlem that you just saw and Karel van Mander. When he was young, about a year old, he fell into a fire, after which he was never able to fully open his right hand. And this is a drawing that you see of his right hand as an adult. So the only thing he could do was draw, engrave, and paint, because he would be able to put his tool a certain way, but he could never open the hand. He's an amazing artist. Became quite successful. This is the kind of engraving, moralizing engraving that he would do, and that is a good example. Things that would make people laugh, but at the same time learn. This is unequal love. And what you have on the left is an old man with a pretty young girl, where he's really trying to get her convinced of his importance and everything. But you can see that she is kind of moving away, and very often while he talks, it happens sometimes that she has her hand in his purse. So these I would be on the right is the opposite, is the old woman who wants the privilege of the company of that young man. And these were really made to make people think, but also to entertain them.
Grabbing the sword, she is.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly. She's so happy to touch that firm leg there. Now, one of the most exquisite work that he did is this one. Without Ceres and Bacchus, Venus would freeze, which shows Venus there, and it's you have Bacchus and Ceres, the goddess of abundance, that is there, and without them, she would not be able to survive. But if you look at the delicacy of the colors and the gradation and the beauty of the line, it's an incredibly beautiful work that is, by the way, at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. This is made by pen lines in ink, and you have a feeling it's an engraving, but I think the effect of color is extraordinary. He called that, and in Dutch, it's called penwerken, which means the work of a pen. Another very famous mannerist of the time, Joachim Wittewal. His name can be written in different way. This is the most frequent. That spent most of his career at the court of Rudolf II in Prague. Rudolf II, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, had moved the court from Vienna to Prague and had started there an incredible court where he would gather scientists, philosophers, musicians, and painters. He had his own zoo. He had a tremendous collection. If you remember what we talked about the collections last time, he had one of the largest collection in Europe. And he was a very strange character. Didn't remain Holy Roman Emperor very long. He was imprisoned and died actually in Prague. But he was very fond of very graphic paintings, and these are typical, so with lots of nudity and lots of gods frolicking all around, as you can see in this one, the Golden Age, celebrating the time where gods were doing very well. And so it's all an occasion to show nudes, and these were small paintings, what we call cabinet-made paintings, where you would come close to the painting to appreciate it. Many of the paintings were on copper, so allowing that great detail that you see here. This is another of, artificial versus natural, of course. And here's another work that shows the quality of his art. Sine Bacco, Frigid Venus. So that's the same as we saw with the previous, with Goltzius. It's the same subject, but more dressed than it is. But you can see again the talent of that painter. And then we have Karel van Mander, who I mentioned before, who wrote the Schilderboek, which is the book of paintings, where he makes the equivalent of Vasari with the list of Flemish and Dutch painters until then, and celebrating what they did. He was not a great painter, though he had lots of commission. This is one of his works. The continents, I don't know what's about. Oh, you did. Okay. Okay. The continents of Scipio, where we have Scipio that shows that he can live. He is not going to fall for that woman that is offered to him. Beautiful landscape in the back, very much influenced by Jan Bruegel, by the way. So I'm going to take 5 before I move to Utrecht. So we can, if you want to get a cup of coffee and stretch your legs, we'll talk about Utrecht and the Master of Light and Frans Hals. So if you can put, can you put the light on? It's at the door, just put one of them on. That's it, perfect, thank you. I know I gave you a lot of history, but it's absolutely necessary if you want to understand the difference with
history is fascinating, and I'm really enjoying that part.
Thank you, Cynthia.
I have a question about that. So these Protestants, they were sort of maybe a little bit less. What would you say? Emphasizing the nobility. What kind of access did the common people have to all this beautiful art? Did they have access to it at all? Was it all just for the nobility?
No, the nobility doesn't exist in the north anymore.
That's what I thought. So
that's correct. So all you have is going to be rich merchants, people in the trade, and the rich, how can you say, functionaries, if you want, people that were working for the administration, scientists that are successful. So these would be typically the recipient of these type of paintings, and it would be limited to the encounter, invitation, as I say, all these works become conversation pieces. And
So still only wealthy people, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the others had to live on. The only thing that is cheaper are the engravings. And that's you find engravings and woodblock print in farms. So that's. Howie, you had a question.
Thinking about what she was saying, you mentioned that the gap between rich and poor grew.
Yeah.
When the aristocracy went down. I would have.
No, not right away.
Mhm.
So you first have aristocracy is gone and they build up the country. But with the building up of the country, the gap is going to grow. So between 1600 and 1650, this is the time where it goes, because the merchants get very, very rich.
Did they get richer than aristocrats?
Aristocrats were not supposed to work.
No. So they weren't all.
So
rich.
aristocrats were living from the product of their land, typically.
Farmers working their land.
Exactly. So merchants, yes, if they invest in ships that go to the Far East or to the West, yeah, they made a lot of money. And we'll see later on there is some problems once for example, the tulips and so on come, the commerce of the trade of bulbs, tulip bulbs, for example, is going to ruin some people, because if the ships sink, all your money is gone.
It makes me think about the Ceres without Ceres and Bacchus.
Yeah.
Venus.
Yeah.
Versus, well, Ceres is like crops.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
So-
the agriculture and the.
So the aristocracy without farmers farming their land, their love dies.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's absolutely. All these were full of underlying meanings and so
So
on.
they're saying like without food and wine, romance dies away.
Yes,
Is that what? they
because
mean by
yeah,
Ceres?
very much, very much.
Oh, look at this. Entre les tours de Bruges.
Yeah.
Down.
Yeah. And it's really when Bruges, you see, when the harbor, the wind that was coming here silted, all the ships couldn't make it, so they come out of Antwerp. So all the ships goes to Antwerp from Bruges. Into songs.
And when they desalinate or when they pump away the
Yeah.
seawater, they have to desalinate the
Of
land.
course, of course.
Is the land all salty? And how do you desalinate land?
Don't ask me.
Oh,
But you can look into that. They by certain,
but you can do it.
there must be some, that's where the invention of so many things happen.
It's amazing. I
Yeah,
mean, when you think about, some country would say, I want more land. I'll conquer yours. I'll take yours. away."
yeah. No,
Instead,
here
they
they
say,
work on
I
it.
want more land. I'll make some land.
Yeah, exactly.
That's.
The Dutch are very, very proud. Okay, we're gonna start again. If you can turn off the light, people. I'm going to mute you again. Okay, so we're moving to Utrecht and the Masters of Light. So Utrecht, as I mentioned, is in that province really squeezed between Holland and Gelderland, and remains Catholic. And when you go to Utrecht, you have museum. They still show lots of Catholic paintings, and there is the big cathedral in the middle of Utrecht. Utrecht, the center of Utrecht, is a very pretty place. The surroundings of Utrecht is dangerous. There's a lot of industries around, and there are gangs activities around, but the old Utrecht in the center is really beautiful. Interesting story about the Cathedral St. Martin. There you see it in 1254, beautiful building. And then there was a lightning strike that took down the center part of the cathedral, and they never rebuilt it. And it's now you have the front with the towers, and you have the nave at the back, but the transept has disappeared and they never rebuilt it. So it's really interesting. And in that place, because they go on having a lot of art for Catholic, for the churches and so on, we have much more religious art. And one of the early one that is going to bring that more, what they call Caravaggiste influence, so the influence of Caravaggio, is Abraham Bloemaert. And here you can see a little mix of Mannerist, but with a coloring that is much closer to the color base of Caravaggio. Two main names: Hendrik ter Bruggen, that was born in The Hague from a rich Catholic family, studied with Abraham Bloemaert, went to Rome and Naples in 1604, came back to Utrecht in 1614, became master shortly after that, got married, and stayed in Utrecht until his death. Produced most half-length figure of drinkers, musician, but also large-scale religious images and group portraits. And here you can see right away that influence of Caravaggio with these more theatrical scenes, that kind of a spotlight effect on the figures on the right. And then what you see here just in opposition, you see the dark back of Christ, who is pointing at Matthew to say, you have to follow me. Matthew, the taxman. This is called a repoussoir in French, but it's the term, accepted term in art, to say repoussoir, to increase the contrast between the color and the dark. Yes?
Was that cropped down, or was it originally larger than that?
No, that's the way it is. So it is definitely only partly, you see just the profile of Christ here, really cropped, but that's on purpose, and to emphasize the more dramatic aspect of it. And if you compare to Caravaggio's Calling of St. Matthew, you can see more or less how he's inspired by it. It's just a reverse image, but you also have Matthew surrounded by young, either street urchins or young people that were helping him in his job. He is also known for these musician paintings, quite decorative type of works, where he shows here a flute player. And it's again compared to Caravaggio, the lute player. Also, you have that very simple background, but that's less than profile image of the flute player, who is therefore anonymous, but more contrast of light and dark. Or in his religious painting, Saint Sebastian, attended by Saint Irene. Minimum decor and artifacts there. The other painter from Utrecht is Gerrit van Honthorst, born in Utrecht in 90, also student, pupil of Bloemaert, went to Rome in 1609 and 10, was known in the Italian name Gerardo delle Notti, because the Dutch and the Flemish were known to spend a lot of times at night, drinking and dancing and making noise. He dies in Utrecht. He's also known for his nocturnal scenes. He made important commissions for churches and palaces. He was definitely the most successful of the Caravaggistes. And here is some of his work. He loved these night scenes with just at the light of a candle. And this is going to be found in some of the work of Rembrandt later. the adoration of the child, where the light comes from the child himself. And then some more moralizing stories, such as the procuress. The procuress is the old woman that you see there on the left, who is trying to put these together, and especially for the girl to get money from the guy. This is literally a scene of prostitution, in a sense. These can sometimes be also equal to the prodigal son. Very often, the story of the prodigal son is shown under these kind of things, where he's spending his money on girls or on card plays and so on. The lute is always the symbol for sexual encounters. But you can see that the flame of the candle is almost hidden by the shoulder of the young man, but has that great impact on the face, the joyous face of the girl. One other painter in Utrecht is Dirk van Baburen, and I'm showing it because this very painting belonged to the mother-in-law of Vermeer, and you can see it in one of Vermeer's painting. It appears there on the wall. This is that very painting there. So shows it's always interesting when you see the painting in a painting of the procuress, another old woman pushing that young woman who is playing the lute to extract some money from the men behind. In architecture, we don't see a lot. It's very classical. It's not the Baroque. You have on the left the famous Moritzhuis in The Hague, the beautiful, one of my favorite museums. If you haven't seen it, make sure that you see it when you go to the Netherlands. It's the building itself is a pleasure, and the collection is superb. You have the girl with the pearl, the view of Delft by Vermeer. You have the Paulus Potter with the great bull, the big, large bull. Many Rembrandts and lots of treasures in that. But it's a beautiful building. As I mentioned, it got its name not from the Prince Maurice, but from a cousin. And then the other one is the Huis ten Bosch, which is not a royal palace, the winter palace of the royal family. As you can see, it's not extravagant. It's a very classical type of Baroque. And then finally, we go west from Utrecht, and we go very close to the coast with Haarlem. And I've pointed here, sorry, the image is a little blurred, but here is Amsterdam and here is Haarlem, very close. It's about 15 minutes train ride from Amsterdam. Just a beautiful city too. The main buildings, of course, the mill, which is always there. And I don't know if I showed, sorry, yeah, I had to pinpoint. This is the Bavo, which is the big cathedral that has went from Catholic cathedral to Calvinist building, has extraordinary organ in it and great concerts there. This is the butcher house, which is the guild house for the butcher, very large building, and then just very typical traditional gates that where the city was, you could only enter through the gates. So you had to have permission to come. If you were trading things, you were paying taxes at the entrance of the gate and so on. It was not a free entry, and then the beautiful mills that you can still find here and there. And we talk about Frans Hals, a wonderful painter born in Antwerp in 82 or 83, we're not quite sure. His parents emigrated to Haarlem in 86. Two of the two brothers born became painters. He studied with Karel van Mander, enrolled as master at the Guild of St. Luke in Haarlem in 1610, worked as an art restorer for the city council, not to Roman Catholic art. That's the whole problem at that time, is that a lot of art had been damaged, and so what they wanted to keep was to be restored. His first wife died in 1615. He was left with 2 children, will remarry in 1617, and will have 11 children with her. Only 4 of of these 11, 4 of them became painters. In 1616, he went to Antwerp for a few months, did meet Rubens, but by 1654 became destitute and was awarded a life pension by the city elders, and he's buried in Sint-Bavo in Haarlem. Only 225 works are known, and no uncontested drawings, no prints. We'll see in the later artists that one of his students was a woman, and her style was so close to Frans Hals that many of her works were attributed to Frans Hals, because it was paying much better if it was a Frans Hals than if it was a Judith Leister. So this is an attribution, probably a work. They thought it might have been cropped because the existence of the engraving that you see on the left. But by the way, the painting goes on all the way to the bottom. They don't believe that it was cropped. It's actually the engraver that lengthened the painting. And it shows Jacobus Zophius, who was the abbot of the Augustine monastery near Alkmaar. But little by little, he's going to change. This is actually the biggest competitor he had at that time in that area, which was Michiel van Miervelt, who is also part of a family of painters. And these were the typical portraits that were made at that time, very official. The guy knew exactly what he wanted to show. It was rather severe. This is going to change completely with Frans Hals. This is not a portrait, but it's an allegory. It's the Shrovetide revelers, showing this subject of what they call a Mardi Gras, in Dutch Vastenavond, which is the pre-Lenten feast devoted to fools. And 2 of these figures are recognizable. This is inspired by another painter, William Buitenweg. But 2, the Pickle Herring and Hans Vorst, which were 2 figures that were known in Dutch country. Pickle Herring, so he has herrings hanging around his neck. And then you have Hans Vorst, it's for sausages. And so these were part of these stock character for comic theater. And so you have garlands of eggs and sausages, and the other one, sausages there. And you have the woman, what you think is a woman, is most probably a male actor disguised as a woman. And you have all kind of food and objects, such as the bagpipe. And different things make believe that this actually a chorus of sexual reference. You have the Hans Vorst having a pretty graphic scene between his 2 hands, is giving an obscene gesture. And so this is just one of the fun, entertaining type of paintings. But here you will understand exactly what I mean by a complete change in portraiture, where now suddenly things come alive. And what Frans Hals is really going to show is that moment in time where people are interacting and they seem to almost going to talk to you. And particularly that little girl is extraordinary. And we know quite a bit about her. She's at that place, she's age 2. She was born in 1618. The nurse is giving her an apple. when she's suddenly distracted by the arrival of someone, and look at the way he paints, because that's the brushwork is amazing, much faster than you had at that time, where he just pushes the brush here and there and makes that lace, just crisscrossing a little bit of the brush. That girl married in 1635 Cornelis de Graaf, who was elected many times as Burgomaster of Amsterdam. So she became a very famous lady. By the way, how you can differentiate boys and girls, because at that time they both dressed more or less the same. A boy until age 7 is going to wear a dress, and the girls have pointed caps and stiff semicircular collar, whereas the boy have a flatter cap and falling collar. That's the only way you can differentiate a boy and a girl. But I love the expression of the little girl. It's so alive. And then, inspired by the painting of the celebrating Rubens' marriage, here it's a portrait of Isaac Abrahams Massa and Beatrix van der Leen, just a married couple. And as you can see, is very much, influenced by the painting by Rubens. Also still have some plants and so on that all, talk about faithfulship, long life, and then the lovely landscape on the back. And you can see also the integration of the emblem that shows Amiens Vita, which again talks about the faithfulness in marriage and so on. What you find, is also interesting is the equal role of men and women in that painting. You don't have somebody superior to the other or taking over. You really have a pair of people. The wonderful Laughing Cavalier, which is the Wallace collection, by the way, in London. If you go to London, go to see that beautiful collection there, is superb. The sense of immediacy, the brilliant colors. You have the big lace on the wrist and on the collar, probably celebrating the young man's betrothal, because the costume is full of symbols: arrows, bees, flaming torches, lovers' knots. All these are symbols that have to do with upcoming marriage. Again, with what we see is, and especially in that blow up of the sleeve, very free brushwork. His age is 26 and is indicated on the top right of the painting. What is interesting is that in 1865, Hals was forgotten. And it's Torre Berger, who was a very respected art connoisseur and historian of art, that brought him back. The painting came to auction, and Lord Hertford, the fourth Marquis, spotted the painting in Paris, called simply Portrait of a Man. The Marquis wanted it, so did the Baron of Rothschild. The Marquis got it, but at 6 times the demanded price, which was 51,000 francs. The starring role of the painting in the sale helped re-establish the reputation of Frans Hals. And from then on, his prices went up. And he was rediscovered, and there were some stories. It's a marvelous portrait. Here's also the married drinker. Look, the immediacy, the mouth open to talk to you is just there. You can face him and have a conversation. He is holding what you called a Römer coming from Roman, So the old Roman glass is inspired by old Roman glasses. It has knobs on the stem for the very good reason at that time people were still eating with their hands. And so when they had meat, they would eat, they had all the fat of the meat on their hands, and then they would grab the glass and the glass would slip. And so the knobs were helping them not slipping, because these are large glasses, they can be heavy if well filled. So these are called Römer, and so the German from Roman. Again, we talk about the immediacy of the paint, of the brushwork. Look at the detail of the beard. Very, very quick brushwork. It was purchased by the Rijksmuseum in 1816 for 325 guilders, when the same year a painting by a Dutchman, a little landscape, sold for 5,610 guilders. And Vermeer View of Delft sold for 2,900 guilders. Now, when he was commissioned for a painting by bourgeois people, then he could go back to a more traditional brushwork. And here you have the portrait of Nicolaas Waters van der Meer and his wife Cornelia Klaas Vogt. And I want to mention, while we talk about it, when you see that SZ at the end of a last name, the Z dot comes from zoon, son. So he's son of Waters, Waterson. The same for her, she's Klaas DR, Klaas daughter, dochter. So they shorten it by DR for doctor, daughter, and son with the Z, just zon, zone. So here you have much more traditional, with the typical somber clothing. But despite the black on black, he gives you a sense of relief. It's amazing. I showed you this before, René Descartes. There are many copies of this one. It had to be done before September 1649, when Descartes got courted by the Queen Christina of Sweden, who had read, Queen Christina was a very avid reader and was very interested in his work. And as she was queen, she thought she had lots of privileges, and she really tried to get Descartes to come and live in Sweden. And finally, he decided to go. And this is a really sad story. So he had spent 2 decades in Holland, pretty free to do what he wanted. And at that time, there was the difficult time in Sweden. It was called the land of bears and rocks. And he was supposed to teach Christina 1 hour philosophy every morning at 5 o'clock in the morning. She wanted him to be there and teach him philosophy. The guy had never got up before 10 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly he's got to change his way of life. And he didn't resist. He caught a bad cold and died about 2 months later after his arrival. It's really tragic. Here, some other of the works of Frans Hals, more allegorical, no more portraits. This is young man and a young woman in an inn, so most probably the prodigal son. I love this one, the little Tondo with the laughing boy, most probably one of his sons. And the typical long tees of the Dutch people that are known for these long tees at the front. It's so adorable. But again, he was painting so fast, it's incredible. Boy with the flute, again, very lively. This is, you can hear, his laughter. It could be, by the way, part of a series of 5 paintings on the 5 senses, and this would be hearing. And Malababa, that's a person who was confined in the city house of correction. This is a real person that he painted, and there are many variations. You can see she has an owl on her side that can be either wisdom or sometimes a satanic approach. And she has, like, you can almost hear her laughter, bad teeth, and then ha ha ha, really, she's drinking. Look again at the fast brushwork. His paintings are going to be so influential on Impressionists. You can't see them from close. It's not like Vermeer, where you want to look, at a few inches from the painting. You have to step backward to really get it. Then you get the painting. If you come too close, the brushwork is too significant. He was very known for his portraits of officers, but he hated to travel. So he stayed in Haarlem most of his life, except when he went down to Antwerp. And so all these officers had to come to Haarlem to be painted. And contrary to what was done before, again, when he shows that series of people that all paid to be on the painting, by the way, that painting was going to be hung in the hall of the banquet hall for that particular series of officers of that company. You can hear the buzz of them talking to one another. All a different attitude. And of course, the most important, and again, we see this, I didn't mention, but we saw that the laughing cavalier, that position here where the elbow is really coming to the spectator, if you want, was a sign of maleness. It was really affirming, I'm the man. This is the way it was done before. So a very static way, as you can see, where you had to see everybody because they were paying, but it's very artificial, where the other one, you can, it's like a movie, it suddenly stops and then you can imagine that the movie goes on and they keep on moving. Another one here of the officers and sergeant of the St-Andréan Civic Guard. It's also a kind of introduction to what Rembrandt is going to do with the Night Watch, where it's also a painting where everybody is paying to be on the painting, but are so lively, so alive. And this is the same thing, very animated version of that large portrait. The corporalship of Captain Renier, sorry, that's too fast. And even if it's more linear, you still have a sense of movement. And he uses really color to structure the form, that beautiful gold sash is really doing it. And then the banner. In this case, he was asked to be more traditional. And he was asked to go to Amsterdam to finish the painting, and he refused. And it's another painter that had to finish it for him. All these militias, because there was no army in the Netherlands. And so each province had its militias that were, when they were not fighting, and most of the time they were not fighting, it was mercenaries that were fighting, but these were there in case something would happen. And what they would do is gather once a month or whatever, have a big banquet and enjoy themselves. So it was a very social venue too. Now, as we mentioned, there was a lot of charitable contribution. Here are the regions of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Very different view because it's very dignified. All the characters there are gathered around the table to discuss an important matter. Now, you do have bravura, and in the others, we had bravura and gaiety, and here it's sobriety, and the subject is quite different. Much more intimate by the light, a moderate chiaroscuro. The pure color has disappeared. It's more of a harmony of gray and black. He also received less commission by that time. Same thing here for the male regents of the old man's house. So this was the old man's house, by the way, where he ended up his life in, where for people, older people that had no place to go, that were not well or whatever, and didn't have enough money. And so he ended up there. And it's always very funny to look at the face of that guy. He looks completely drunk, but he's not. This is a fashion. It was a fashion to put the hat very much on the side. And but really interesting to read the character of all these people. Here is the Old Man House, which is now the Frans Hals Museum in Haarlem, and a beautiful museum. And then to finish here is the female regent of the Old Man's House. And they're really interesting because you can again read this. This is the servant coming in, bringing some milk or whatever for them to drink. But the characters are also quite interesting. And you can almost feel that he is not sympathetic to the women. And in the background, by the way, you have a painting that represents the Good Samaritan. Sorry, I didn't do it well. I was going to show you a blow-up of the woman. So this is Frans Hals, who unfortunately finished his life miserably, but was an incredible innovator, really brought a new style that's going to be followed for another 20, 30 years until the style changes again and they go back to fine painting, and which is going to be the demise of Rembrandt. So next time we start a series of many classes on Rembrandt. These will be his early years in Leiden and Amsterdam. And I wish you a very happy holidays. Enjoy the good times. At least we can socialize a little bit. And I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to the Netherlands.
Are you going home?
Yes, I am. I know. Let me finish for a week.